welcome to this World Transplant Day 2022 Roundtable. My name is Anna Morgan Pilardi, and I will be moderating the Roundtable today. We're super excited to be coming together to discuss the world of transplant and donation. Today I'm joined by some of the world's most wonderful recipients and advocates. Let's take a minute to introduce them. I'd like to welcome Denise Rediker, the CEO of Heartfelt Help Foundation and heart transplant recipient. Brooke Garrard, liver transplant recipient and founder of the Bonus Years podcast. Lorena Pitts is a heart transplant recipient from France. Danny Hiles, a liver transplant recipient and founder of the Danny Chats podcast. Aileen Young Hager is a heart transplant recipient from Norway. Zach Brooks is a two-time kidney transplant recipient and founder of World Transplant Athletes. And Jesse, a brand new executive director of the Chris Klug Foundation. So thank you all for joining us, and let's kick off with a little bit about transplant life. The transplant process can be extremely daunting for those who are just starting out in the process, or even those who are 10 years in. So what comes along with the transplant diagnosis?
I was going to say, I think for me, it was a lot of fear, knowing that I was going to need a transplant. For me personally, the distance between there's no other option but transplant and transplant happened in about a 2-week span of time. So I didn't have a whole lot of time to process it, but it hits you like a cement truck, really. I mean, it's just, for me, it was something that I had heard the word before, but I never knew it was really going to happen to me until it did. And then it was like being hit by a cement truck. Danny?
Yeah, I was going to say pretty much the same. I was told that I was going to need a liver transplant when I was younger, and they kind of offered me one when I was younger, but I went on medication. But then 15, 20 years later, when they sat me down and they said, it's time for your transplant, it still was like, wow, like, you know, this is big. And you have that sort of moment where everything goes quiet and you're like, wow, and it takes a while to process.
I mean, for me, the first time around, the second time was different. The first time around, I think there was a lot of fighting. You know, why me? You know, I'm a victim. My life sucks. It shouldn't happen to me. All those kind of things. And that, for me, took about a month before I finally just told myself to snap out of it and just deal with it. But I kind of really fought that diagnosis for about a month or so because I was really upset.
Similarly, I was healthy my entire life, and at 20 got diagnosed with autoimmune hepatitis, and then within 6 weeks was in liver failure. So the wrestling of like, what do I do? Is this something I want for my life? I don't know anything about transplant. I honestly didn't even know what was going on in my own body. And there are a lot of patients who come at it from that side, where it's very sudden, very quick, and the processing has to happen later.
Lawrence, you're muted.
Sorry. I had a quite different experience because I spent a couple of years in heart failure, and I'm a very big Googleizer of medical problems, which I probably shouldn't be, but I guess we all do that around here. And I auto-diagnosed the fact that I was going to need a heart transplant, and all my doctors were denying it. And this lasted for years. It lasted for actually like 3 or 4 years. And all my family, my friends were in denial of it. My doctors were in denial of it, and I knew it was coming. So it was very different because I spent 3 years basically fighting against nothing, against wind, trying to get used to this diagnosis that I had placed on the situation. And when finally my cardiologist said, yeah, you're going to need transplant, it came as a huge relief. So I actually cried with relief, which seems crazy to most people, but it was like, okay, finally someone is listening. So it was quite, nobody has ever told me that they cried with happiness. Maybe that was also because I didn't realize how hard it was going to be, but it came as a big relief.
I think if I'd have known what transplant was going to be like what life was going to be like after my transplant, I probably would have cried with relief. But for me, like, I didn't know what life was going to be like at all. I didn't know anyone that had a transplant. I'd never looked into it, even though they'd said about it years ago. So for me, it was like, what is life going to be like? I didn't really expect it to be this great, to be honest.
I think you brought up a really great point there, Lawrence. So do you think Google coming into this day and age is kind of a benefit for transplant recipients or potential transplant recipients, maybe helping them become more of an advocate for themselves? Or how do you think that has affected?
It's beneficial. It shouldn't be, because it's not complete. You can easily go down the rabbit hole. I've auto-diagnosed myself with so much shit that wasn't true, you know. So I think, and we all know that Google is extremely dangerous, but doctors, I don't want to, you know, talk shit about doctors, because they have saved my life, and I'm grateful to all their personal and professional investment. But they are so unwilling to listen at times. And they just seem to have, in my experience, I have had so much stuff brushed off. Like, no, it's not that, you're going to be fine. No, 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 don't worry. That Google has, unfortunately, well, been of great assistance to me, even though there are obviously bad sides to it. But yeah, it's been very helpful.
I don't think we heard from Eileen yet about your experience. I wanted to hear from you too.
Well, I was on the heart transplant waiting list for 4 to 5 months, and for me that was so terrible that it actually was kind of a relief when the phone call finally came, and that surprised me because I didn't want the heart transplant, but living with heart failure was so hard. So you realize at some point there is only one way forward. And I was actually at heart transplant assessment 9 years before that too. And my children were very young at that point. They were aged 2 and 7. So for me, I was really scared at that time because they were so young. I was afraid I would die and they wouldn't remember me. So when I finally got to heart transplant, it was a relief, but I was also very scared. I had Googled a lot and frightened myself to death. And also, I'm not your regular Norwegian, so so there was a lot of uncertainty if a suitable heart would show up in time, because I have a rare blood type for Norway. So there were, a lot to consider.
Well, thanks everyone for sharing. Does anyone have anything to add about sort of the process of transplants, the good, the bad, the ugly that comes post your transplant? Obviously, it's not just a one and done kind of thing. It continues for years. So does anyone have anything to add about that?
Well, I'll say something about the Google and research in general on the internet. I mean, kind of like the other comments, on the whole, I think it's positive. But having studied decision making, it's really important to have really good anchors. So as painful as some of the doctors can be, I think they serve as good anchors, because you shouldn't get too far away from some of the things they're saying, because you can drift off into quackery. You know, people just trying to sell a pill for a couple of dollars, or someone who, you know, promises a better life. And I had to deal with some of that as well. Someone was like, oh, if you just take these pills or massages or this sort of weird Chinese kind of thing. And like, there's a lot of good Chinese medicine, but this one was not. I was in San Francisco at the time. So I think, you know, Google is really good, but you have to really mind your anchors and not get too far away from some really solid scientific evidence, because in the end, you know, I'm here because people for, you know, over 70 years now have been doing, working on this approach of medicine. So that's my own tip on using Google.
I totally agree with that. I know I'm very guilty of overusing Google, but I do agree with you. It's just that sometimes it's so frustrating. And sometimes maybe things are different in the US. We've had this discussion many times with Denise, that you are clients, we are patients. there's a great side to having a state-funded healthcare system, and I wouldn't change it for the world, even though there are other challenges. But it's that we don't have to pay, which is, in our case, amazing. Yeah, but the other, the downside is that we take what we are given. We can't complain, and I see that, you know, Eileen is, because she's in the same situation as I am. Sometimes I'll go for a day in the hospital, you know, when you have like a whole day of assessment, and I will finish my exams, let's say at 11 a.m. And I can wait for like 7-8 hours to see my doctor. And I can just say nothing anyway, because that's the way it is. It's free, and you can't complain. You're not a client. So sorry, I'm totally drifting off from the topic, but it's, I don't even know what the topic was anymore. It was.
With the using Google, when I was diagnosed, they luckily picked it up for me, but I speak to a lot of Wilson's disease patients that have all the symptoms. But I mean, this was an example of what a doctor said to someone is, that's so rare, you can't possibly have that. So I think if people can take these symptoms to their GPs or their doctors and be like, look, this is what it is. Can you please test me for this? Can you do this? Then I think that's quite important, rather than the doctors just dismissing it.
That makes me think about just how advocacy for ourselves might look different from country to country. Because I'm still learning. I'm 17 years post liver transplant, and I'm still learning the best way to advocate for myself while still falling into what we call being compliant. And Denise and I could probably talk about this for hours, because being compliant is so important in the US. And I can't speak to other countries, so I would love to hear from you all. But if they deem you not compliant, you aren't going to be eligible for another transplant. So like, it's this fine line of learning to walk where you say, I'm not well and I can tell something's off, and I need your help, and I'm going to get help. I'm going to figure out how to get help for myself. And the language that I've started using is like, you know, we have all these different specialists that support our health, but I am the only person who is the specialist in me as a whole person. And so I take it really seriously when I think about my whole health, because no one knows unless I tell them. And so I think it's really powerful to think about that in different contexts. And I would love to hear how it is in Norway and France and the UK as far as like advocacy versus compliance, if that's even language that you all use.
Our country, we're only 5 million people, so there aren't a lot of heart transplants around. So I felt alone, and there's not a heart transplant community to reach out to, pretty much. So, and also we only have one transplantation. There's no going elsewhere if things doesn't work out. So I've been open about heart transplant, heart failure on my Instagram account, and a lot of Norwegians have reached out because that's the kind of information we don't get, and we also have public health care, for which we are grateful. But it also means that there's only one source of information. And there's a lot of pressure, I feel, for organ transplant recipients to be grateful, and we are grateful by all means. But there's a fine line between being grateful and not being honest about post-transplant life as it is.
I obviously agree with what you said about being honest about post-transplant life, but I'm happy I didn't know. I'm going to have to disagree with you, Danny, on that. I'm actually very happy I didn't know how hard some challenges were going to be. I think there's a big difference, and I've noted, because I know transplant recipients from different kinds of organs. A lot of heart transplant recipients were not ill when they were young. So we have a before and after. we know what it's like to be in good health. Like Danny, you were always sick when you were a kid, from what I understood. You were always in survival mode. I have a very good friend who's had a double lung transplant, and all her life she was sick, so she only got the good stuff from her transplant. But I used to water ski. I had a totally normal life before going into heart failure. I mean, I knew I was supposed to not do some stuff because, yeah, we knew there was this problem, but that was it. So am I grateful that I got a transplant? Yes. Do I resent the pressure to be always grateful? Yes, enormously. The one thing that drove me the crazy one day was when my doctor presented me to another doctor as meet Miss Apitz, who is the incredibly lucky recipient of a heart. And I just wanted to say, you know, I'm sorry. If being born with a genetic condition and fighting for my life all these years and going through all this, if you call that being lucky, that is not luck. I'm sorry. I can't, it really drives me crazy when people say that. So am I grateful that I'm alive and that somebody was smart enough to let me have this heart? And that's another subject I'm sure that we'll talk about later. Of course, am I grateful that there are people who work 24/7 to make this work? Yes. But do I think I'm lucky? I wouldn't go that far.
I think that's really valid. And I was not sick at all for 20 years and then got sick, and within 6 weeks had a liver in my body that I had no idea what was going on. Because of that, and what you called the pressure to always be grateful, I definitely felt that, and I'm years out working through some of that in therapy, because there's a lot of medical trauma, even if your transplant goes perfectly. And there's a lot of pressure. Maybe pressure is not the right word for me personally, but I definitely feel like as a person who advocates for organ donation and wants to like show what a recipient's life is like, there's a certain persona that's accepted more than others. And what I spend most of my time talking about is the toll it took on my mental health that I was completely unaware of, that no one prepared me for. The feelings of survivor's guilt, like why am I allowed to be alive when someone else died? Why at 20 am I just like able to get a transplant so fast and other people are waiting for a long time? And then trying to reintegrate into a normal college kid's life, going back to school, learning to set healthy boundaries around my time and my energy. Like nobody at 20 says no to things, they just do whatever they want. And so I had to like reconcile this like invincible feeling that I had before in myself with like the reality that no, I need a certain amount of sleep to function, and I have to have timers to take my meds. And how much do I want to tell my friends about what's going on versus how much do I need to disclose for my own safety and wellness being away from my family? And I think there are just layers and layers of like our mental health that we could unpack. Maybe we could do a series, because it's just at different stages in transplant, it's been different for everyone. And there have been times where I've been just so grateful to be alive. But compared to like a normal day, like it's still a struggle sometimes. And I don't want people to walk into transplant thinking that it's a cure, because really it's a Band-Aid. And it gives us life. But there are days that I ask myself, is this the life that I want? And I know that I am not a typical transplant recipient. I have a lot of complications. I've had a lot of rejection episodes. Like Danny's freaking like healthy and doing exercise and stuff he never could do before. And I'm like, I'm gonna maybe walk the dog this week. Like, it's different from person to person. So I don't ever want to give the impression that we're all the same, because we're totally not. Even though we've all received transplants, we are definitely different.
So yeah, I mean, I think Lawrence and Brooke have really like, maybe it is an entire series that there's this font, this volcano of kind of emotions that we could probably talk about. I mean, just what came to my mind, this is, I got my 2 transplants, one in my 20s, one in my 30s, like at the prime of my life, and talk to people like, oh, what they have these assumptions about how wonderful things are for me. Especially after my first transplant, someone told me, oh, you must have such a great perspective. And maybe like Lawrence and Brooke, and I literally wanted to hit that person. Like, so I'm the one who has to carry around the mantle of a great perspective, while you get to be the person who just gets to talk about the person with a great perspective. And it took me like 15 years to figure out what it meant, because I did have a great perspective after that, but what did it mean to me? And I finally boiled it down for myself, which is, on one hand, from my 2 transplant experiences, my parents as donors, and all sorts of other things, I have like incredible empathy and sympathy and a huge heart that I didn't necessarily have before for human suffering and people's legitimate, hard, dignified desires to make it through that suffering to the best of their ability. Like, I absolutely have that and more of it. That's the beautiful part of the transplant experience for me. On the other hand, I can't deal with any bullshit. I have a really like low tolerance for that. So that was the perspective I had, but I really can't stand whoever that person was so long ago who said, oh, you must have such a great perspective. So yeah, I could talk about this for a long time, like Brooke and Lawrence and everyone else. And maybe we could do a series on this, but I think that's really important. If you're watching this and thinking, how am I going to be afterwards? Well, it is a wonderful thing to have, and you're going to have other struggles. And guess what? You have this really cool community of people here on Danny's channel, on everyone else's channel, my channel, that you can talk to now that a lot of us didn't have when we were going through our journey. So anyway, this is just great. And thanks, Anna, and everyone else at CK after doing this. That's my thought about that.
I think things would have been different for me if I had known that the transplant community, the online transplant community, existed before my transplant. It would have probably avoided all this Googling, or a bit of it. I actually created my Instagram account 3 weeks before my transplant. Well, when I got listed, because I only stayed 3 weeks on the list, which goes to show you how right I was when I said I needed a transplant and no one believed me. So I created my account. I didn't really know what to expect, but I thought, maybe I can meet some people. You never know. And then all of a sudden, I was in the hospital and I had a terrible post-transplant. It was horrendous. And all these people were sending me messages, and these people saying, it's going to be fine, you're going to get better. It's bringing tears to my eyes just talking about it. They really saved me. Really. It's what made going through the hospital bit bearable. Knowing that there would be an after, because people who had that after were telling me it was true.
Absolutely. I could not agree with Lo more. It's this community, and finding this community saved me. Finding Eileen and Lo saved me. And because, I don't know, and I really would be interested to see how it is like for Jenny in England and Eileen in Norway and Lo in France. I don't know how it is for other people, but for me, they threw me into this support group meeting with a bunch of 75-year-old men who had heart transplants, and all of their wives were complaining about what bears they were to live with and how horrible they were because of the prednisone. And I literally burst into tears and thought, well, this is not the path for me. I don't want this transplant. If that's what it's going to turn me into, if it's going to turn me into someone that everyone in my life hates to be around because of the prednisone, I don't want to be in that world. That's not who I want to be. And I remember sobbing in the hallway and just thinking, what have I gotten myself into? What is coming my way? I hate to say it, is death a better option at this point? And because those were my options, transplant or death. And I mean, clearly I went through with the transplant, but it wasn't, if it weren't for me sitting in a hospital bed and looking on, at that time, Facebook, I didn't even think to look on Instagram at that moment in time, but looking on Facebook and finding someone who looked like me, who was my age, who was running half marathons. And I was like, you. And I gave this poor woman no choice at all. Luckily, she's lovely and we're still friends. But I gave this woman no choice. I messaged her on Facebook and said, will you be my friend? I mean, basically, I need somebody like you who's figured this out, who's not complaining, who seems to have this worked out. And she, you know, obviously said, I don't have all this worked out, but this is what I'm doing. And she was 5 years post, so she's now almost 10 years post. And it was life-saving for me, because then I had somebody that I could look to and say, okay, that's the direction I want to head. When my recovery, because my recovery was similar to Lowe's, it was terrible. I had 3 open heart surgeries in the span of a week. I almost died 3 times post-transplant. I was far less healthy immediately post-transplant than I was pre. But having this internet community gave me the hope that things were going to get better, gave me the ability to set a goal that when I got out of the hospital, that this was what I wanted to do. That was what I wanted to do. And that's, I mean, anybody who's watching this, I would really encourage, if you're not finding the right support, like within your team and within your group, it's an easy search online, and you can find people like us who are very willing to help mentor you through the process and tell you at least what our experience was, because everybody's experience is different.
You know, all the things that people say about social media, which I totally agree with that social media is super toxic and all the stuff people say. Well, the transplant community is the absolute contrary of that.
Yeah.
That's what I want to say.
Yeah. Just to add on to that and what Denise was saying was, after my transplant, I didn't know where things were going to go. I had that sort of similar experience in hospital of we had a talk from somebody who was, you know, he was living a very, very sheltered life through his own choice, but it wasn't the life that I wanted to continue after. So I had all these questions, and unlike Denise, I didn't really want to just message someone and ask them the question. So I disguised it in the fact of like, oh, let's record a podcast. So people were willing to come on and talk to me. So I was gaining all this information, and you know, I just thought, oh, well, this is great because I'm learning it and we can put it out there. So yeah, and talking to people like Gillian Best from Canada, who swam across Lake Ontario, you know, like when you hear that, it just really, because you know, I didn't know what I could do, and when you see that and the way I feel, I'm like, wow, you know, that's possible for me. So all them stories, and hearing the other sides of the stories of, you know, people saying that I really struggled mentally after, which I did. I found the mental recovery was a lot harder than the physical recovery for me, and I went through counseling and everything else, and I think a lot of patients do, but not everyone always talks about that side. So yeah, talking to people in the transplant community is very, very beneficial.
Yeah, social media is definitely one thing that has helped. And there's a lot of, we work closely with a lot of different organizations. And one is a completely anonymous platform for transplant recipients to go on and ask all of these questions. And, you know, then they don't have the pressure of people knowing who they are or anything like that. It's completely anonymous, which I think is a great tool. So let's move on a little bit. We have 2 or 3 from both an opt-in and an opt-out system. So what are our opinions on each of those stance?
I mean, opt-out, I think the numbers suggest it's just better for waiting lists. And if, you know, shorter, so just, you know, anyone who's listening the first time, if you have a shorter waiting list, that means your chances of getting heart, kidney, lung, whatever it is you need quicker are better, and that reduces the after, you know, kind of treatment issues you have to deal with. I mean, the less time you're on sort of dialysis and other things, you know, likely someone's going to be able to treat you better afterwards. So I think the opt-out program is better because it reduces the waiting list time. I mean, to me, the numbers suggest very clearly why that's a better option. I'm in the United States where we don't have that, so I wish I were in a country where we did have that sometimes.
Anna, could you explain briefly opt-in versus opt-out for people who may not even know about this yet?
Yep, absolutely. So opt-in is a system where donors have to register as to give the gift of life after they pass. So it is going into the DMV and registering yourself. An opt-out system is you are automatically deemed an organ donor unless you specify that you do not want to be. There is 2 ways for an opt-out system to be overruled, where you choose to opt out or your family chooses to opt out. An opt-in system only has 1 way of you signing up and 1 way of you removing yourself, and that's your decision. So that's the kind of 2 differences.
So I know someone, Zach mentioned that America is the opt-in. That was us until the UK very recently. I think it might have been earlier this year that they changed it to an opt-out system. So we're kind of yet to see the full benefits. But like Zach said, I can't imagine it. It's got to be a lot better because you are going to get a lot more people that donate their organs. But for us, it's a case when we try to tell people about it, it's still important to speak to their families, because Anna said that, as Anna mentioned, it's kind of them that have the ultimate say when it comes to it. So it's really important that people let their family or their next of kin and people around them know that they want to be donors. And it doesn't have to be a big conversation. It can just be something very short and simple, like, oh, one day, if this happens, I would love to be a donor, and that's it.
Eileen, I know you're getting involved with Norway's organ donation program. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, I can. We have an opt-in system, and I know it's been discussed a lot of times, and we're still in an opt-in system. And what I've been told is that similar countries with similar healthcare systems don't see a rise in numbers, even if they go for an opt-out system. And Norwegians are generally, they have a high trust in government. But as we saw during the pandemic, as soon as people feel pressured into something like vaccinations, the protests get so more vocal, and the emotions get there's so much more emotions involved. So what we feel is that information, education is more important than forcing people into an opt-out system, because it often forces people to make a decision before they have the facts. So I have to trust the system.
Is that hard for you?
Well, I also have a son who's sick. He has heart failure. It's a genetic disease. So when I think of him, I wish that we could just force everybody to be organ donors. But I also know that it doesn't work very well. People need to be given a choice. So that's why I'm involved with education and information and advocacy.
I feel really torn between opt-in versus opt-out, because I keep reading about both sides of it. And as a patient who needed a transplant, it seems fantastic that it would everyone would be a donor and you could choose to opt out. And then the side of me that wants autonomy over my own healthcare, and to be able to make my own decisions about what I do with my body. I feel that very deeply too. And so, and I don't know if I trust or distrust the government depending on what day it is, but I feel like I can trust my own intuition. And so at this point, I think I lean towards the educational component, and continuing to educate people about what their options are. Even though, like Eileen, I feel that that depth of, like, I just wish everyone would do it, like, because that's your reality right now. Like, you're caring for your son, and it would have changed things for you. And I think sometimes we frame this as a really black and white option, and there just aren't that many things that are black and white anymore. And so I just always think, as I'm talking to people, being aware of their perspective, being aware of other perspectives that we can come at it humbly without all the information and have a good dialogue about it. Because Danny and I talked a lot about opt-in versus opt-out right as it was changing in the UK. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's make it happen in the US. And then I started reading some articles and talking to some people I know here that are in that process in the US. And I wish that things were easier. I guess is what I'm saying. I wish everyone could be helped and we could all have our own decision-making power, but we would all make the right decisions and the best decisions. And that would be clean and tidy. And that's just not life. Life is not clean and tidy, especially in our world when we look at, what we've gone through, what we're going through, medication management, mental health, all the different things. So that's kind of where I land on that.
I think it's important. It's important that people understand that an opt-out system is never going to be a totally opt-out system, because families always have the last word, which is totally understandable. Because imagine the situation: somebody just died, their family is grieving, they're crying, and they take away the body because the person hasn't opted out to take its organs. That would be unbearable. So that's why the family always has the last word. But so there is never, the opt-out system will never be 100%. It's advocacy is still necessary, because in the end, it's the family who decides. That's very important that people realize that in all the opt-out countries, like most European countries, it's really important to speak to your family.
Yeah.
I speak to high school students every semester about organ donation, because here in California, you're required to have a segment. The freshman high school students are required to have a segment on organ donation before they get their driver's license. So I go in, I am the checkmark box of talking to kids about organ donation and what that looks like, and the real life story about, this is what happens when you get to donate your organs, is you get someone like me who talks to you about organ donation and is a transplant recipient. But every semester, I am so disheartened to hear kids, and I mean, they're kids, so that's one reason, but telling me stories from a Netflix movie that they watched that's ridiculous, or that doctors aren't going to save them because that's what they saw in a Netflix movie, or or that's what they saw because Hollywood presents it, because it tells a more dramatic story if they lie about how the organ donation process works. And so every semester, half my job is dispelling these myths that largely Hollywood puts out there, and movies put out there. There's a Netflix movie that I wish I could remember the name of right now, that was last semester. Every single class I talked to, and I talked to 8 classes of freshman kids, every single class brought up this movie. That was a limited series on Netflix early this year.
Squid Games.
Nope, it's not that one.
No?
It was a I can't remember. I would totally know the name, but it's an ongoing process. It's not, I don't hear the religious exemptions like I used to a few years ago. Like people, my religion, nobody believes that really anymore here. But Hollywood, if there's a movie out there that portrays organ donation, or a TV show that portrays organ donation in some sort of weirdly negative way, like they're not going to work to save your life, or any of those things, we hear about it in classrooms all the time, and it keeps kids from signing up to be organ donors.
100%. We, part of our whole thing is to talk to, educate, and inspire young people. So like Denise, we talk to them regularly, and it's crazy how many, have these perceptions of it because they've seen it on a TV show. And once you sit there and you tell them, they're like, oh, wow, that's really cool. like, that's really cool that I can do that for somebody else. Yes, 100%. I will be a donor. What is that even a question? And as soon as you break that myth that they've heard, they're 100% in, and then you hear them telling all of their friends exactly what they've heard. And it's a great method. But yeah. Anyone else want to add?
I just want to say that it's the same in the UK, that people still believe that if you're an organ donor, the doctor won't save you, and stuff like that. But also, I think, knowing all my friends, loads of them are like, oh yeah, I'll be an organ donor, but they're all too lazy to sign up. So I think the opt-out system's good, because, you know, it just saves them doing anything as such. Because, like I say, loads of people are lazy. They'll say they'll do something, but we don't have like Denise was saying, where you go to have your driving license and you have to do this course or anything. We don't have that. It's literally, if you wanted to sign up, I suppose you just have to go online or speak to your doctors. And again, people are kind of lazy for that.
Awesome. So let's move on. Let's take a look at sort of activity post-transplant. I know it's obviously different for everybody individually. Some people can be super active, some are a little more affected and cannot. So what's everyone's opinions there?
Well, this is the entire premise of, World Transplant athletes. If you have a body with a new part, you are a World Transplant athlete. So we divide the kind of world into three things. This follows along a fair amount of research too. The general activity, so moving around the house, whatever that is, and that's extremely important. I mean, Brooke spoke about that directly. We're talking, World Transplant athletes is talking to people about doing a series of podcasts, just people who just move at a basic level, and that's the most important level, because anyone, whether they're get to more athletic type of ventures later, that's where they start. So that's extremely important. The next level is exercise, more sort of frequent kind of activities, and the last level is training, and that's for a smaller group of people. So we really think this is the most fundamental thing to have, especially with our mission of our organization is to have recipients talk to other recipients and encourage them to move, whatever that movement means. And it's not about being an athlete at all. I mean, it's called World Transplant Athletes, yeah, but really it's just about movement. And if we can inspire other people just to move after their transplant, and through these kind of networks and others, talk to each other and say, hey, you walked 5 minutes today. Fantastic. Great. Well, tomorrow you can walk 6. We can encourage each other. Then individually, and I think everyone else has spoken to this, we can improve our lives, together. And this is what I'm kind of losing some trains of thought because I have so many at the same time. But, it's really, I think, important if you're watching this from the outside that, you as an individual are going to remain very individual after your transplant journey. Like, one thing that I really like about these conversations is that we all have a lot of respect for each other as individuals. Like, my story is not the same as Eileen's or Brooke's or Denise's or anyone else's, but I really respect how individual that story is. And so there's not like a stamp that we're all healthy and perfect right now. No, we all have very individual journeys continually. And in terms of getting back to World Transplant athletes, we just want to help you on your journey through movement. And we really believe your short-term health and your long-term health and your happiness will be positively impacted by simply being active. So, I can talk about this stuff for a long time, so we absolutely love it and our team of people. And I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the conversation here.
Yeah, Jack, I agree with you. Having the motivation to move post-transplant, one of the nurses, when I was in the hospital and not doing well at all, told me to set a goal, set a movement goal, set something I want to do that I wasn't able to do pre-transplant. And I picked a hike. There's a local to me, there's a waterfall, gorgeous waterfall that falls onto the beach in Marin County. Y'all should come and see it. It's gorgeous. And it's called Alamere Falls. And it's a pretty aggressive 4-mile hike out, 4-mile hike back. Pre-transplant, that was not an option. That was not an option for me. But I've always wanted to see it. I've seen pictures of it. I've always wanted to see it. So that was what I did in the hospital, was set a movement goal, and then worked my butt off to get to that place once I got out. And then when I finally got out there, I thought, this is easy. And what a miracle that was. Watching Eileen hike has just been so inspirational to me, man. Makes me want to travel too, and watching Danny do all of, to do his training, it's all of that is super inspirational to me, to keep moving and to keep going. Just yesterday, I did a 10-mile hike and it was so fun. But yeah, I think encouraging people to move in their, whatever their capability is, because your capability not only can improve, but it also can change. You can be able to do a 10-mile hike yesterday, and today things aren't chugging along the way they should be for whatever reason, and it's a slower day. And so every day is different, every day is unique, everybody's unique. But encouraging movement, I think, is a step towards healing for me.
I agree with that, but I also tend to find that the push for activity in the transplant community can be a bit daunting. I used to be really my passion was skiing, snow skiing, and also water skiing. But I've never been, maybe I'm a little bit of a lazy, capricious person. Long hikes bore me. Sorry for all the unpopular opinions. Which is something difficult to, a point of view which is not always accepted in the transplant community. So after my transplant, my obsession was being able to ski again. And I did. Spent a week skiing last winter. I couldn't go for that. I had my transplant 2.5 years ago, and I went out of the hospital, and 4 days after, it was confinement. It was COVID, the first wave. So I wasn't able to ski, and all I wanted to do was go skiing, which I did, and doing all that stuff because I just don't like it. And so I think it's also important, like, for example, Zach, when I saw your logo, all that stuff, I was like, oh, wow, World Transplant athletes, what's that going to be? There is a lot of pressure to prove that you are worthy of your organ. You are worthy of the gift that has been given to you, and that you're going to push it to the max, and that you're going to do it. And I find that sometimes a bit much. I'm worthy because I am, because I know I'm a worthy person. And if sometimes I'm lazy, well, that's fine. Yes, activity is great, but you don't always want to get your steps in. Just that expression, getting my steps in. I try to walk, and I do actually, I walk a lot, but I don't feel like I need my 10,000 steps a day or stuff like that, because no, I'm just a normal person. I try to be a normal person with all the not today aspects.
Mine and Lawrence's heart transplants are only a month apart. I was a month before. And by the time she had hers, and she was so sick afterwards, I felt so bad for you. I was already out hiking. I think it was good for me to know you, to get to know you, because it kept everything in perspective. I was in a wheelchair before my transplant because my heart was so weak. I couldn't stand upright, I couldn't walk. For me, being able to walk, being able to hike, and everything, that was my dream. And I needed to learn that it's not everybody's dream. It's not, you can be a heart transplant recipient and you don't have to hike, you don't have to run, you don't have to do all these things. And I would understand if some heart transplant recipients would find me irritating, because I know I can make it seem like I've had a heart transplant, so this I have to do, but you don't. You can choose a totally different activity, or no activity. I would recommend some activity by all means, but you don't have to be an athlete in you know, in the sense that you run or hike or do any strenuous exercise, it's okay.
I love that perspective. And anytime I see the word athlete, I immediately run the other way because I've never been an athlete. Like, that's just not something that I see the word athlete and I identify with. And for me, after my transplant, the worst part was when they made me get out of the bed the first time and walk down the hallway. And I just remember crying and thinking, like, if this is my life, I don't want it. And so I've had to do a lot of like healing for myself with like my relationship to my body and expectations that I put on myself or allow other people to put on me. But the thing that makes me an athlete is that I'm a singer. You cannot be a singer without your body working properly. And so, like, Eileen, you wanted to hike. Like, I got out and I was like, I got to go back to school. I want to finish my voice degree. I had to rebuild those muscles and retrain myself to sing and to have breath support and capacity to do the thing that I loved to do. And I think sometimes we see the word athlete and we go, oh God, I'm not an athlete. But then when you think about it in your own context, like, we're all athletes. We're all doing something to get stronger at something that we're passionate about. And, you know, as in my work as a chronic illness and organ transplant coach, I talk to people all the time who are like, I don't know what to do. I don't feel like doing it. I don't want to go like run a 5K. I'm like, I can relate to that. But it's so much about doing what you are able to do and learning to live in balance with your body and listening to your body. And for me, every time I've tried to push myself past what I was capable of, I got sicker. I'd have migraines, or like my body would ache for days and then I would just be like out of it. And so learning that balance of like, yeah, going for a walk every day or going up the stairs and down the stairs in my house. Like, sometimes I don't want to do that. But to realize, like, everybody's being driven by something that they're passionate about. And that's what makes them an athlete. That's what helps us keep going and recover. And, you know, that's what connected me. I mean, as a 20-year-old, I went to my first transplant games the year after my transplant. And I got to meet Chris Klug, and I was like, oh my gosh, he's like an actual athlete and he's doing stuff. And it inspired me not to go become an Olympic snowboarder, because that would never happen, but it inspired me to pursue my own dreams. And those are the kind of things I want people to see across our platforms and our social media and in our advocacy. Like, we're not all doing it the same way. We're not all living our life the same way. We're just doing the things we're passionate about. And oh man, Lawrence, like, we're worthy because we're human. Like, I just, like, when you said that, it just resonated with me. Like, we're not worthy because we got an organ. We are worthy because, like, we are crafted uniquely and beautifully, and because sometimes this just happens in life and we don't have an explanation, but we're worthy because we're people and we matter, not because of what we do or how we do it.
But there is a lot of pressure to be worthy of your organ. People have to know.
100%.
And I think a lot of people look at Chris and go, wow, I need to do that. Chris is an abnormality. I know him. He's a complete like beast. I don't know how he does half the things he does. And I think setting your own goals and really aspiring to what you can achieve and not comparing yourself to anyone else is so important. But I just want to touch briefly, we did talk about mental health, but how do you think activity may help transplant recipients with their mental health post-transplant? Does anyone have something to say on that?
I think seeing your own progress is absolutely amazing. I can only speak from the heart perspective, but so I don't know how it is for like kidney. But literally, before my transplant, I could not go and buy a loaf of bread at the bakery. Sorry, I'm French. This is an important activity for us. You have to imagine that there are over 17,000 bakeries in France and Paris, so you never have to walk far away. I couldn't do that without stopping every 50 meters. So I got used to finding excuses when I would be walking with people. I would look at the shops, look at the most stupid random shops. I would look at like a real estate agency and would look at all these apartments. They all look great, just because I didn't want to admit that I had to stop because I was going to collapse otherwise. And for me today, just walking a couple kilometers just for any kind of activity, random, I have to go buy something or whatever, but if there is a possibility of my walking, I walk, because every time I walk somewhere, I remember that I used to not be able to. So I think, see, I'm getting all emotional about it. I'm still on prednisone. That's what, don't worry. And if I go, for example, to the restaurant, I go out a lot. The toilets in France are always underneath the restaurant in the cellar. So I used to have to, I would calculate, how am I going to get back up if I go to the toilet? And then I would stop in the staircase, but I had to stop in the staircase not too high, because if I stopped at the end, people would see, then catch my breath at one point where people wouldn't see my face. So I'd catch my breath. There were like 5 steps left, which meant that I could walk the last 5 steps and enter and go back to the table without people realizing that I was trying to catch my breath again. And what's crazy is that 2.5 years post-transplant, staircases is scary every single time. And every time I go up a staircase, I'm like, wow, that was so easy. I can't believe it. So I think all these, that is like the very minimum. When you do something that you know that you used to not be able to do, it's beneficial for our mental health, because it reminds us that now we're here. Now it's working.
Yeah, I've found that training really helps, but I train outside quite a lot. So I think it's the mix of being outside, and I've got a dog which I take out twice a day. So I think being outside is really, really beneficial for me anyway. It kind of just keeps me grounded. If I'm having a really bad day, that morning walk with the dog just kind of sets you up. And the same in the evening, if you've had a crap day, just to go out into the woods and kind of just stare at nature for a little while. And just like I say, walking is just good. And then if I do, I hate running, but I still do 5K runs. I never look forward to it, but afterwards, I'm always really pleased afterwards. And that's kind of like Lawrence was saying, is because that wasn't something that I could do before. So just that achievement, every time I do a 5K, I'm like really pleased that I did it, and I'm not even too fussed about trying to push it further. I'm just happy with that.
And maybe the key is that Lo hit on it, is that the key is not losing your sense of wonder about what you couldn't accomplish before and now you can. And even if that is walking up a flight of stairs with ease, that if you have a sense of wonder about, wow, I can still do this. And I have the same thing. I burst into tears when I got to the waterfall. When I climbed to tops of mountains, I burst into tears because that was a pipe dream for me. And, I never thought that would ever happen. But that doesn't have to be the sense of wonder, accomplishing some physical goal doesn't have to be your sense of wonder. But I think maintaining some sort of sense of wonder of, wow, I couldn't do that before, but I can do that now. Whatever that happens to be for you. But I think Lo hit on it. I think it's maintaining that sense of like wonder about it all. Whoa.
Great. Thank you all. So geez, I'm looking at my notes now and I can't read them all. Yeah, so new research on the horizon. Does anyone have some new research that they're excited about? Maybe that's coming out, they've heard about, they want to talk to us all?
Well, I'll go back a little bit. So my first transplant games was in 2006. And that was the first time I'd been around so many people who had had a transplant, met any living donors, donor families, and then going into like an expo hall full of like pharmaceutical companies and advocates. I remember, I think I took away 2 things from that. I took away, hey, there's a sunscreen that completely blocks the sun, and I need that because I'm really pale. And that there's constant research. And so like, I can always hold on to hope that there's something coming that's going to change the face of transplant. At that point, they were still developing the 24-hour tacrolimus, basically, which is now like what a lot of patients take as their standard immunosuppression medication. I'm not one of those people yet, but I'm still holding out for it. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, I could take a pill or two once a day instead of taking pills all the time. That sounds amazing, because at that point I was just still completely overwhelmed by the fact that I had to set timers and take pills throughout the day at different times. And I was like, oh, okay. And then there was this really cool technology that you could wear, like basically attached to your Under Armour if you were an athlete. So like on impact, it would harden and protect your organs. And I was like, genius. So now I do a lot of work with Lifebulb and Transplant Life, and they hold these innovation challenges all the time, where they support up and coming new innovations and help fund things. And so I'm getting to watch, I feel like history like progress in a really cool way, even from like xenotransplant talk to, the oh gosh, I lost my words. Tacro brain. That they're doing different kinds of transplants now, still very experimentally, and just the hope that I have for that, that's always a big deal to me. Like, I have to remind myself that things are constantly changing, and that change is not bad. That change can be good, and reminding myself that transplants have not been going on that long in the context of history, and so we have just a long way to go still, and it still feels like we're at the beginning of it in some ways. I mean, I've been on meds for 17 years and watching my activity and my mental health and learning new things that we can help hospitals hone in on and social workers help with. And I guess my big desire for technology would be that these companies that are raking in money, like pharmaceutical companies, would start funding small nonprofits that are doing amazing work, like what Denise does.
Yeah.
Me too.
Me three.
Yeah, although I am so grateful. As much as I would like big pharma to start sharing the wealth a little bit, I am so grateful that they're doing the innovation that they're doing. I just read an article not that long ago on the future of 3D organ printing. Can you imagine? That is super exciting. It's not on the immediate horizon, obviously, but it's coming, and that is super interesting to me. And the ability to, I know they're doing research on helping patients, obviously heart and lung are probably going to be the last on this list, but to wean us off of anti-rejection medication, which would be a godsend. And I think that's, I know a couple liver recipients who are in the program and off any kind of rejection medication at all, which is just absurd to me, but so cool. So I think those are the things that excite me, is things that maybe won't affect me, but will affect the next generation of transplant patients.
Yeah, we've actually started working with a pharma company who is rolling out a new line of non-invasive rejection testing, which is super exciting. They've actually rolled out their kidney program, and they are working on their liver, which is hopefully going to roll out in November, and then slowly through the rest, which is really exciting. But I actually have to run, so I'm going to pass over the moderating to Denise and Brooke. And thank you all for joining us, and have a great day.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Jesse.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Jesse.
All right, where were we on the list? Now I don't have my list in front of me. Let's chat a little bit about inequities in transplant, maybe. and get that to, or bring that up. I'm really curious about what Lo and Eileen and Danny see, because I know what I see in the US. But I don't know what you guys see. What do you guys see as inequities in transplant in your country where you are?
I don't see any inequities in transplant. It's a very, very transparent system. There is one national transplant list, and you get listed on this national list, whatever your hospital is, and then according to the rank you have in the list, which is dependent on so many factors. Probably obvious to you because I guess it's the same in the US. Your number in the list changes all the time, and the organs, all organs are distributed according to compatibility, starting from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's extremely fair. And I see it in the hospital because I see it in the waiting room. It's absolutely all kinds of people. And I know that there's been a lot of people saying that people of color, for example, don't get enough organs. Or in France, I don't know the numbers, but from what I'm seeing, it doesn't seem to be the case. Totally diverse people in my transplant unit. So this is just my observation, but I don't think this is a problem in France from what I can see.
Danny?
I know in the UK they have sort of a drive to get more people of different ethnicities to become organ donors and blood transfusions because I think as just a white male, I've got a very high chance of getting an organ, but as a black male or an Asian male or female, I don't think it's the same, and I think it's because there's less people giving blood and less people becoming donors, and for whatever reasons, whether it's religious reasons or just the education's not been there for everyone yet, I don't know. But yeah, I don't think there's any, it's definitely not done on purpose, because they can't really just be like, oh, we're just going to give this to a white person over anyone else, because they've just got to go with what matches. And yeah, so and from what I've seen on sort of social media drives and stuff like that, they do try to push sort of Black and Asian communities to become more donors and stuff like that.
Eileen?
Yes, that's been the case in Norway as well. Norway is a very homogeneous society by all means, but I know there's been issues with to get information out in different languages to our immigrants, and that's very important because they'll need heart transplants, they need to be organ donors, so that's important work. Other than that, I can't see any inequities in our system because like there's this one national transplant center, just that one hospital. There's no we have everyone is under the same healthcare system, so it's pretty much the same for everyone. So you can pay yourself into a better hospital because all transplants are done at a public hospital. So
the inequity level that I see in the US is it's many layers. First, it's not the system, because that's fairly anonymous. Once you get listed for a transplant, it doesn't matter who you are, what your background is, what your ethnic background is. None of that matters. All that matters is blood type, body size. Are you a match? And how sick you are going into it. But it's the getting to the listing part where there's a lack of education, there's a lack of, I ran across a story the other day from a doctor friend, a medical doctor, cardiologist friend of mine, that one of his patients never made it to transplant because he never got the medical care because he wasn't educated enough. His lack of education put him at a disadvantage to get to the medical care that he needed to get him to the transplant list. By the time he finally got in to seek medical care, it was too late, and there was no way we could put him on the transplant list because he wasn't healthy enough to survive a transplant. And that's initially the level of inequity that I see, is the making it to the transplant list because of myths about organ donation, because of lack of education, because of lack of access in the US to standard of care, just basic standard of care healthcare, that would get these amazing, precious people screened and tested and diagnosed early enough that they could get to a solution, whether that's transplant or medication or whatever. That's the first level. And then the second level is once you get listed, once you get presented for transplant, there's a financial aspect to it, which is why we started Heartfelt Health Foundation. There's a financial aspect to it. If you don't have the money to pay for what insurance isn't going to pay for, the biggest of that is post-transplant housing costs. Your listing can be delayed. You can be moved to a status 7 until you raise the funds. I've watched people be told to go home and have a bake sale. I've listened to patients say that they were told to go do a GoFundMe, that they were told to go have bake sales, so that they could raise the money to pay for the mandatory post-transplant housing. For heart transplant patients, we're required to live within a few minutes of our transplant facility for 3 months, 6 weeks minimum, 3 months, probably more likely. And that's a second mortgage, or basically that you're paying to relocate to wherever your transplant hospital is. Where I am, that's either moving to Silicon Valley or moving to San Francisco. And neither of those places are inexpensive places to relocate to. And if you don't have the money to do that, what are you going to do? I talked to a prospective patient for the foundation just last night who she's pregnant and her baby will not survive without a heart transplant. And she needs to relocate from Las Vegas, where she currently lives, to San Francisco, where the only specialist that deals with neonatal heart disease that requires a transplant immediately upon birth, which is what they're going to do. They're going to put this, they're going to induce labor. When the baby's viable, they're going to deliver the baby. Baby's going to go on life support until they hopefully find a donor within a few days. That's the goal. But she has to relocate. She's a single mom. She has 2 other kids. Dad's not in the picture. She's not working. Where are you going to find the money to pay for this? And her baby is out of luck without nonprofits, basically. I would love to see the system change so that patients like her, she's the reason why we do what we do. She's the reason why we do what we do. So that these people who should be focused on their family's recovery, their baby's recovery, don't have to focus on that. They can focus on that instead of focusing on how they're going to pay for what is an extraordinary amount of money. It's astounding that we are in a place in this country where we have to even talk about this. It shouldn't be an issue. I would love to see legislation change so that our foundation doesn't have to exist anymore. But the level of number of times a day that I say this just isn't fair. It isn't right. It isn't fair. None of you want to count. It's the stories that I hear are just heartbreaking every single day, and they all wrap around money. Now, I could talk about this for forever, but I won't. I'll let somebody else talk.
No, I think you have such a valid point. And as people who, I mean, there's so many different ways to be involved in transplant, from, and advocating for legislative change, raising money, raising awareness. And I think for me, it always has to come back to like these real stories of real people. Because it's so easy when you're advocating with legislatures to talk about how policy needs to change, to forget that the reason is that people are at the heart of it, and that lives matter. And no parent would want to have to make the kind of decisions that this mom is having to make. And so I'm just, that story's kind of floored me, Denise. I mean, it keeps happening. It's not like this is the first time that it's happened. And it also ties into this like support system you're required to have post-transplant, right? Like a lot of people have no control over what kind of support they have financially, all of that.
I was just going to say, to kind of sum it all up is, and from what I've learned from my chats is, we are all transplant patients, but we're all very different, and everyone's transplant journey is different. So it's very important that, okay, it's great to take inspiration from other people, but it's very important that we realise that it's our own journey. And not to put too much pressure on ourselves to be like another transplant patient. You just have to be you and do what's best for you.
That's it, is that everybody's adventure is unique, and it is indeed an adventure.
I think this has been a really productive conversation. I've gotten a lot of insight from it, and I agree that these are the kind of ongoing conversations that are really going to add value to our community and help us all feel more supported, and maybe see some differences and some similarities across the world of what we're dealing with.